Well, hello there and welcome to Travels with Geordie. If this is your first visit, my name is Peter Knowles and I live on this classic wooden motor cruiser here in Victoria, British Columbia, along with the loving memory of my pup Geordie, all the while fixing it up for some pretty impressive cruising someday, getting closer and closer. Anyway, if that's the sort of thing you might find interesting, please consider sticking around and subscribing. I'd love to have you. And in this episode, frankly, I'm not even quite sure what this episode is about because I'm messing with the timeline a bit. Been working on quite a few things, trying to get ready for the first engine start, which will be this Friday. In fact, in the past. Yeah, see what I mean about the timeline thing? Anyway, we're working on the Helm. It's back together, having been apart. Let's jump back in time and deal with that. And then after that, we have more engine connection things to do. Some of which are already done. Alright then, so here we are caught up in real time, or now, or whatever that means. Okay, time to wire up this panel and start to get the engine functional for tomorrow's first start. This should be able to swing right up like I intended it to be able to swing. Anyway, there we go. This is going to start with some terminal strips, some bus bars, and a couple of relays. Relays? What's that for? Okay, so here's the various arrangement. Those of you who know me probably know I've been at this for a little while. All right, so this ground bus bar and this terminal strip are basically for loads that are serviced from the Helm. Things like nav light, spotlight, anchor light, things like that, that come in and drop a ground right away, and then their switched lead will come to here and then up to the switches. So that's that looked after pretty much. This is going to be the power terminal strip, so the various circuits that are coming from the main panel will come in here, and that's a circuit obviously for the nav lights, for the wipers, for the Helm itself, for the engine, for the macerator, all those things. So those are all going to be the power leads. Over here are going to be all the connection terminals, which is stuff like the 3 wires start, stop, preheat from the engine, 2 from the oil pressure sensor, 2 from the high temperature sensor, 2 from the alternator, etc. So I've pretty much got this laid out. Let's screw it down and start pulling wires. Oh, the relays, sorry. These 2 relays down here, these are your standard Bosch style cheapy relays. You never know what quality you're getting when you buy these things, but they're so cheap and ubiquitous you can get them anywhere. 5 terminals, 2 are to open and close the relay. The other 3 are common, normally open and normally closed, which is essential for what we're doing, because as I mentioned, I can't start and stop the engine with a key on this boat because I have 2 Helms. I don't want to start it downstairs, go upstairs, and not be able to turn it off without running back downstairs. So I'm going to use a latching relay, and you can create a latching relay easily with 2 relays by supplying power to 1 relay to close it, and then that will close the circuit, and it'll stay closed through the normally closed circuit of the other relay. This is getting too much. I'll draw in a picture in a minute. Anyway, the point is, I press 1 button to turn the ignition off. I press another button which opens this relay, which will turn the ignition off. Anyway, we'll get to the details of that shortly. So I think I got this all in my head. Well, not quite in my head. Come on, you knew I'd have a drawing, wouldn't you? Funny, for a guy who uses AutoCAD regularly, a hand-drawn schematic is often all you need. Okay! Just as I'm tightening this down, I realize that's too close to the switches that are right here. Yuck. A quick little zing with a cutoff wheel, a compromise on running the wires underneath, and shifting over slightly solves all of that. But it's a hit to elegance, especially when I now have an exposed screw hole in my panel. Urgh. I'll just fill that extra little hole with a screw, and it never happened. You're the only people who know. All 20,000 of you. All right then, well, this piece of 3-strand will be the first wire between the Helm and the engine. Now you'll recognize this as regular AC wire, but in the absence of a multitude of color options in the marine wire world, this will do fine. Basically, it'll be start, preheat, and stop. White hot. I think that's great. Well, I've chosen to route the wires from the helm to the engine down through this routing here, this hatch being one that's opened regularly for storage, so I have full access to all of this. So now I'm setting up at the engine. One of the first things I need to do is test the stop solenoid to see if it's sensitive to polarity, which I very much doubt it is, because after all, it's just a solenoid. So I've just connected some wires to it here, and let's connect them to the battery and see if it goes clunk in both directions. Okay, we'll try this way. That sounds splendid. And this way. So it doesn't sound like it's polarity sensitive to me. That's a good thing. All right, so a quick tour of what we got on the engine controls. This, of course, will be tidy up. It's temporary. Here's the stop, which will be connected to the other side of the stop solenoid. The ground went to that bolt. Here's the preheat up onto the preheat bus. And here's the start connector over here, which uses a spade 1/4 inch quick connect. Excellent. Okay, I've also just put the alternator wire on, which consists of the TAC sensor and the excite or field sensor. So now it's time to put some sensors on for the gauges. So here's the oil pressure sensor and the temperature sensor. We're going to start with this one. The Beta Marine engine actually comes with British standard thread, but I had Beta Marine here in Victoria convert it, tap it out to National Pipe thread, which is how all American senders come. So of course, apparently it's a very, very close thread, just slightly different in the pitch. Okay, so there's the temperature sensor, and I'm going to do a dry fit and see if it fits in the hole it's supposed to go into, which is right there. So really should be a no-brainer. And it pretty much is. Okay, so that's going to be fine. The main thing I was concerned, there's enough depth for that probe to fit in, and it certainly seems as if there is. There's enough room for the connector. I think this is rock and roll. Now, unfortunately, in the thermostat housing, there's actually two bosses. You can't see the other one underneath this casting, which would be great, because that way I could have another sensor for the bridge deck. But unfortunately, the way they designed this casting, they basically block off the upper port, which is kind of a shame. But anyway, okay, so let's get some tape on here and get this on. Apparently, another solution for that is to use this port here, which is technically a vent port, but it's beyond the thermostat. So this won't kick in until the engines come up to temperature, which at least is worth something. And now with the tape on, we'll go back in. I don't know how much room I'm going to be able to get a wrench in there. Not a lot of swing room. A 1/12 at a time. I've had worse. Okay, I'm going to call that done. Excellent. Okay, now for the oil pressure sensor, here's the sensor that came from Speed Hut. And I purchased this separately. This is just a switch so that I can have a alarm go off at low oil pressure. And I've picked up this T that I can use to connect them both to the single port that's sticking out the back of the engine. Here's my concern. This switch, here we go, is relatively heavy. And this is already going to be attached to an elbow on the side of the engine. So I'm getting into a bit of a Rube Goldberg of possible vibration issues here. And I don't know how I feel about that. Because I do not want to break this casting and suddenly be spewing oil everywhere. So it's kind of tempting, at least for now, to just use the gauge sender and skip the alarm at least until after the haul out, and possibly trying to figure a way to make this more elegant. That's what I'm going to do. All right, and here are cables for the senders for the Speed Hut gauges. They use WeatherPack style conductors. I doubt they're tinned, but it's what I'm going to use, and I'm relatively happy with them. I ordered extra long wires because, of course, this isn't a car. It's a bit further up to the helm. Okay, straightforward, right? Let's just run some wires. And the transmission pressure sensor. All right, so if I just review through the old harness to figure out I've got everything done, that was the stop solenoid. This was the temperature sensor. This was engine preheat. This was oil pressure sensor. These two were the alternator. The fuse is irrelevant. Positive, negative, and start. Okay, I've replaced the harness. Okay, brand new battery is in. Battery cables are on. I doubt you can see them down there. I'm basically finished connecting stuff to the engine and the battery. Now, to be fair, there's not much to do here today just to get the engine started. Of course, none of these switches have to be connected up. Basically, it's these 5, and it's really only 4 of them because we're not going to be doing the freshwater flush. And connecting up the gauges, and they're basically just push connectors. Yeah, so I'll begin by taking the push buttons back out. Okay, now these switches are all going to be ganged for power. In other words, I'm going to connect one side of them all together because they're basically all relatively low current with the exception of the preheat. But I think we have enough capacity in the single engine circuit. So they're all going to be ganged together, and then the other connectors will come on the load side. All right, so here's the daisy chain for the power side. Now I just got to connect it to one side of each one of the switches. Piece of cake. Okay, so here they're all ganged together, leaving the remaining terminal easily accessible for attaching the loads. Okay, so let's get them all aligned and then tightened. Okay, here's a little trick. I want to tighten these with this socket, but I don't want to scratch my brass. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of tape and put it over the end, and then just take a knife and score it in enough places that it can still grab the nut, and I should be able to tighten those up quite nicely. Excellent. And no scratches on the brass. Okay, so there's the last of the signal wires or switched wires from the 5 push buttons. And I use blue wire for switched because I'm trying to keep something of a color code. Okay, and they're going to weave their way down and back. Yeah, you can imagine what's going on here. Let's get some zip ties going, shall we? Yes, yes. All right, so I've wired up the relays, and the way this works is that the left one becomes a latching relay. In other words, when I turn on the ignition, power comes through the normally closed contacts on this relay, latching this one. So if I use my little test light on the ignition bus, press the ignition button, that's now glowing. I don't know if you can see that. My hand may be in the way. If I press the ignition off button, it goes off. So basically, by closing this relay, I disengage the normally closed contacts, which releases the magnet in the latching relay, and it opens the circuit. Preheat, you can see the voltage dropping slightly. Start, I'll only just bump it. This is the freshwater flush, which is not connected, and this is shutting off. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And good morning. Well, things did end a bit abruptly last night. Some friends came by from the marina and invited me over for drinks. But you did get to see that everything works, pushing buttons, legs coming on. That looked really fun. So it's time to tidy this all up now, because can you imagine what it's going to look like by the time all this gets wired up as well? Anyway, this is not as bad as it looks. The speedhead gauges do have a lot of wires. Each gauge basically has 3 sets of wires. One for the backlight illumination of the dial, one for the power as positive ground and the needle illumination, and one for data. And they all have these quick connects. Now the 2 power connectors come with these daisy chains. They make you a custom one for the number of gauges you have. So I have an 8 stop daisy chain for both of those. And then data, just plug into the cables coming from the sensors. Easy peasy. Nice. Okay, so, but I think this can be tidied up substantially. I have done the daisy chains in a sort of a clockwise motion, so I should be able to get this reasonably tidy. All right, well that's about as tidy as this is going to be able to get for the next little while, although there's definitely some work to do here. But I still have a few gauges to connect up and lots to go on in here. Okay, so this little, what looks like a headphone jack with a switch on the end, plugs into the back of the tack, or conversely into the back of the fuel gauges, because these three gauges are programmable, and this has something to do with setting the programming. So we'll play with that. I'm just going to let this hang out underneath the helm here as I flip this back down. There we go. Okay, and now for by far the least fun system, and that's fuel. I've temporarily mounted my old Raycor in this location. The reason I'm using the old one is it already has 3/8 fittings on it and it's ready to go. I have a Schwack of brand new proper Coast Guard fuel line. What I don't have is a fuel tank, so I'm going to use a jerry can. Yes, indeed. So I'm going to plumb it temporarily through the Raycor in this location to a jerry can, which will be lashed up front here. I very much doubt I'll actually ever go to sea with it like that, but it'll do for the test start. Now, you may remember that the Raycor, in fact there'll be two of them, will be in the aft end of the engine bay when this is all done properly. Anyway, let's just connect up some hoses and get a little closer to turning it on. Alright, it's going right on there. Now, of course, all fuel fittings would be double clamped eventually, but for this temporary work, I'm not too worried about it. Alright, so here's my temporary fuel tank sitting inside a Rubbermaid tote. Gosh forbid something goes completely evil. So I'm going to put that right into the bottom and then bring that around to here, about there somewhere. Grab another fuel hose clamp, and that's ready to go. And then I'm going to use all the remaining line for the return, because Beta Marine has a requirement that the return line has to do a loop down below the level of the tank before it goes into the tank, in an attempt to reduce the likelihood of it siphoning off fuel and creating a dry start. So anyway, let's just connect this up and see how much we have left. And it'll do a loop and in. And that will completely comply with the Beta Marine requirements. Very nice. Perhaps a couple of zip ties to tidy it up, but that's generally ready to go. Oh, of course, with the exception of tightening all the clamps. Okay, let's change the filter in the Raycor as well as prime it. I don't know what's in here now or how old it is, but I'd like to put a nice new one in. Oh, it's a 10. Well, that's way too coarse for my brand new Beta Marine. I think I have some nice 2 microns that I could put in. Oh, it has a nice credit in anyway, so that's good to see. All right, well, what I'm going to do is actually clean out down in here. I loathe to do this because I hate diesel, but I see just the slightest bit of scunge in here. Now, of course, this is the side pre-filter, so it's not too much of a concern, but I'd rather get it out. Okay, we're going to put a nice new 2 micron in for the beautiful new Beta Marine. Make sure there's nothing on there that shouldn't be. And we'll change the gaskets at the same time. Every time you get a new Raycor filter, you get a new O-ring for the lid and for the T-handle there. So let's dig the old gasket out, our O-ring here. Every time I do a filter change, I always keep a yogurt container handy because it's just so nice for collecting the entire collection of oily junk I'm about to come up with. So let's clean any junk out of the groove here. New O-ring. Okay, so that can go on. And we'll replace the O-ring in here and slide that new O-ring on. Excellent. Okay. Good. I'm just going to seat the gasket once before we prime it. Make sure it all feels nice. It's got that nice, okay, that's good. Okay, so now priming the filter is simply just filling it. Gosh forbid a drop or two goes astray. Okay, here we go. Normally I would prime the filter with a seafoam, which is a engine additive, fuel additive that I'm particularly fond of for diesels, and it's just a good opportunity every time you change the filter to give the injection pump a treatment. But as this is a brand new engine, I'm not sure Beta Marine would appreciate that. Okay, there we go. That's full enough for me. And we'll close her up. Okay, fuel system installed. And now there's nothing left to do but prime the fuel system using the lift pump, which is kind of hidden down under here. Now, there's an interesting feature that is not in the documentation, which is this tiny little valve, which to me looks like a bleeding valve, because this is the line from the filter to the injection pump, and this is connecting to the return rail for the return system. The manual talks about removing a bolt out of the top of the filter, which I really don't want to do because that's always a messy mess. I think this is a new solution, and by opening the valve, which is actually back seated, I can actually prime this, so I'm pretty confident this has ended up primed. Very nice. Close the valve, and we're pretty much there. Okay folks, this is it. Ben Guardside is about to arrive, and we're gonna get this started. Really excited about this. Well folks, it is time for the very first start. Oh my gosh. Ignition on. We're gonna give it a little bit of preheat. Ben says about 5 seconds. Okay, one of the first things I want to do is check the operation of the gauges. We did it when Ben was here, but we didn't calibrate the tachometer. And I thought, well anyway, I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work until I looked at the documentation. So what I need to do is use my little electronic laser tachometer on the engine. And then there's a process by which I can set the tachometer to the actual speed that the engine is running with this little push button, which is plugged into the back. I think I showed you later. So first thing I need to do is start the engine while holding this button down, and then measure the actual, set the speed to something reasonable, measure the speed with the digital tachometer, and then set the dial to the same speed. I think it's pretty straightforward. I played with it a bit, but haven't quite got it right yet. So you hold this on while you start the ignition, and it's supposed to go to 1000, which it does. You let go of this, you start the engine, and I'll go measure the actual speed. 12:14, 12:15, somewhere in that range. So if I want 12:15, it's showing 1500. So you push the button. There we go. So I want 12:15. That would be 12:50. So just shy of right around there. Excellent. That worked pretty well. So depth obviously will show nothing. Voltage is charging nicely at about 14.5 volts. Back will show nothing, it's not connected. Fuel tanks aren't connected. Transmission oil pressure is good. Engine oil pressure is good. And engine temperature is just starting to come up. Woohoo! I'm loving it. It's the first time in a long time I've seen prop wash behind this boat. And no smoke. Okay, I am positively over the moon. This is just so crazy. So crazy. Well, welcome to the Travels with Geordie beer of the day. The most momentous Travels with Geordie beer of the day ever, is it not? Let's get straight to the beer. I've selected a beer that I am certain to enjoy today because it is very important. This is Salt Spring Island's Hazy IPA, Salt Spring Island Brewery, being just north of Victoria here, being the sort of the largest of the Southern Gulf Islands. Lovely place, lovely brewery. I've never had this and I'm sure to enjoy it. Wow, what a couple of days it's been. And yes, of course, you've just watched the engine start for the first time, but I've had to live with this for quite a few days now, having been several days since that was actually filmed. To a running boat. Cheers all. Oh, that is just delicious and perfect for today. Okay, got to start off with yesterday's winner of a Travels with Geordie t-shirt is Bob Samchuk. Congratulations, Bob. Get in touch with me and we'll make sure you get your shirt. Nothing much to talk about today, with the exception of there being so much to talk about. It's been an unbelievable few months since it was evident that the engine that was in the boat was not going to work out. And for those of you who may have come aboard since then, the engine you just saw start, as well as many of the components that made it all happen, were gifted to me. Gifted to me through a GoFundMe campaign that I started late last year. Viewers like yourselves stepped up beyond my wildest expectations and effectively gave MV Geordie a brand new engine, an expensive engine. Also great thanks to Ben Gartside at Gartside Marine Engines, the Canadian distributor for Beta Marine, which was my engine of choice, who also stepped up and was very generous, helping with make it happen, and has been very generous with his time, including just coming for the first start, and went right through the systems, right through the boat. It was just fantastic. So cheers to all of you who made this happen. It's just been amazing for MV Geordie to be mobile again, and mobile with incredible reliability, efficiency. The motor will easily outlive me. It's so exciting, and there's so much to do yet. And yes, I've put off my haul-out, but that's fine. There's tons to do. Wiring, all kinds of things. Might even get some cabinetry done. Looking forward to it so much. Yes, my back is still sort of killing me, but I've had so many kind words and good advice. I'm looking after it. I'm going back to the kinesiologist this week. You've got way too much more information. Cheers. Thank you again. Can you guess the word of the day? Words are thank you. Thank you. Thank you.